So I want to talk to you about weeds this morning, because there are lessons for character building in the weeds. Now, how many of you have a garden? Okay, we got a few have a garden. How many are keeping all the weeds out of the garden?
Working on it.
You know, I've seen a lot of gardens around Wildwood, and most of them start out pretty good. They get the soil all worked up and they put some seeds in the ground or put some plants, and then before long it's growing up to weeds. This is not a good training for the future. So let's look at some things that talk about weeds. But first, before we do, in the very beginning, you all know this, so you won't have to turn to it, but in Genesis 2, verse 8 and verse 15, it says, "The Lord God planted a garden and took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it." So our occupation was to be a gardener. And even in a perfect place where, you know, Adam could command everything in nature, and so he could tell the weeds to stay out of his garden, and they would, but he still had to take care of his garden. And there was a benefit, even in a perfect atmosphere, to Adam and Eve for working in the garden. If we don't work in a garden, we are in danger of not learning the lessons that God has in mind for us. So, of course, some of you are to the stage where you can't, but I know some of you worked in the garden a lot while you could. And so, you know, you do the best you can, but hopefully you've learned the lessons, or as you reflect back on it, you will. But then came sin. And so Genesis 3:17 and 18 says, "Cursed is the ground," but we don't have to stop there, "for thy sake." So weeds getting in your garden is for your sake. "Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life." Well, even us, we sorrow about all those weeds. And it talks about some of the worst ones. "Thorns and thistles shall bring forth to thee." Some of the weeds I have to pull, you gotta have gloves on because of the thorns and thistles. But they have to come out. And I've got one particular weed that there's no way, without digging up the whole garden, that you can stop it from growing, because it always snaps off somewhere down in the ground and the root is still there. So you have to keep on doing it. "Thorns and also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee." But notice, it's for thy sake that God said that would happen. And then when Cain killed his brother Abel, Genesis 4:12 says, "When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength." So here we have three changes in a row. And, well, two changes so far. And then the third one was the flood. You know, when everything gets turned upside down and the whole land's The whole landscape is totally different than what it used to be. And some things that were on the top or on the bottom, we have all three of those curses, and they're all for our sake. It's hard work to grow a garden. That's why a lot of people don't want to do it. And here in the South, it's a lot of work in the hottest part of the year. And so a lot of people don't want to do it. But it was for our sake that gardening became a hard task. Because guess what? Character development is hard work. And if we don't want to do it in the garden, we probably won't want to do it with our character. Now, there's other gardens, and we'll talk about a very important one. In 1 Corinthians 3:9, we're told, ye are God's husbandry. That's like saying, you are God's garden. Now, for God's garden, He knows all the weeds that need to come out. Even the bad ones, He knows how to get them out. But He won't do it against our will. So we have to cooperate with Him when He starts pulling one of those weeds. Goes on to say, as one takes pleasure in the cultivation of a garden, so the Lord takes pleasure in His believing sons and daughters. When I get my potatoes planted, we plant enough so we can eat potatoes all year. And I get the soil all clean between the rows and some weed blocker down so the weeds can't grow. That's a beautiful looking patch of potatoes. And when Jesus is able to get those weeds out of us, He looks back with satisfaction. This is a beautiful garden. But again, we have to cooperate. He can't do it without our cooperation. The weeds must be removed. New plants must be set out. So you put out some plants and they die. I have 2 tomato plants that died because of too much rain. Or at least they look so sickly that I think I'll probably have to take them out. Branches that are making too rapid a development must be pruned back. So if you have trees or grapes, you learn that you have to cut off some of the things. Well, Jesus sees what needs cut off in us. He sees what needs to be removed. And if you will let Him, He'll take it out. So, the Lord works for His garden. And then He calls us the plants of the Lord. Now, you become a plant when you surrender to Jesus. When you say to Him and you mean it, you can have me, you can take me over. And when we are truly meaning that, now He puts us in His garden. And He's going to get rid of all the weeds and all of the changes that need to be made in that garden. He's going to do that, providing you don't squawk too much and stop Him from doing it. And some weeds don't come up very easily. In the Health Reformer of June 1, 1871, it says, as you cultivate your vegetables and flowers, so as we're doing our garden, we need to be thinking. As you cultivate your vegetables and flowers and remove the weeds and prune from them the lifeless branches, bear in mind, this is the work God is doing for you if He loves you. Does he love us? Okay. Now this part doesn't always seem loving because we get attached to the weeds that are in our garden. And when he tries to pull them out, we fuss and we complain about it. But they have to come out if we're going to have a clean garden and we're going to have a good harvest. As you remove everything unsightly and injurious to your plants, that nothing but the beautiful may appear, remember that just so God is doing with your human garden. Isn't that good news? If we had to be the one to weed out the weeds, we wouldn't get them all out. But he's the gardener, and he is going to get them all out if we don't resist, if we don't say no to what he's trying to do. He would discipline you and would root out all the weeds and all the corruption and vileness. Sometimes we don't even admit that there's vileness in us. But he sees all the corruption, all the violence, and he's determined to get rid of it. That you may possess a symmetrical character and be free from evil habits. Now, some evil habits we want to get rid of because we can already tell they really hurt us. But there's some evil habits we don't want to get rid of. But he sees them, and he's going to work to try to get you to let those go so he can get rid of them. That you may not become sour, distrustful, and gloomy. That's what weeds bring about in the garden of our heart. You may not be there yet, but if those weeds don't come out, you will end up being sour, distrustful, and gloomy. And if you try to make believe you're a Christian, you will turn off people from wanting to be a Christian. But if you let him get those weeds out, the opposite will occur. Now, we don't have too many parents here, but no matter how old your children may be, you can still do something to help them. So, in a manuscript 138, 1898, says, teach your children that the garden in which they place the tiny seed represents the garden of the heart. So from childhood, we're supposed to learn the lesson of the weeds and the good plants. And that God has enjoined upon you, their parents, to cultivate the soil of their hearts as they cultivate the garden. He expects them to guard and tend carefully the garden of their children's heart. They are to sow the good seed, weeding out every unsightly weed. So parents are to assist God in the care of their children's garden so that those weeds get out. Now, one thing I learned very rapidly, as a small child, I hated gardening because my parents had a tendency to wait until the weeds were 6 inches tall and send me out to clean up the garden. And so I really hated the gardening. But when I came to Wildwood and learned about the importance of gardening, I said, well, I better find a way to like it. And one of the things I learned was get the weeds when they're little. Don't wait till they get big. Get rid of them when they're little. And that's what parents are supposed to do with their children. Tackle the weeds when they're little. And they're easy to get rid of. You can get rid of hundreds of thousands of them in an hour with just a hand hoe. And if you have a rototiller, you can get rid of even more. Because if they're little and the dirt gets piled on them, that's it for them. Well, most of them. It says they are to sow the good seed. So there's two duties for parents. Make sure the good seed goes in the heart. They are to sow the good seed, weeding out every unsightly weed, every defect in character, every fault in disposition needs to be cut away. For if allowed to remain, these will mar the beauty of the character. You know, really, that's why sometimes we have trouble with each other in the church. I mean, this church is better than most I've seen. But I still hear comments of irritation about somebody's characteristic. And, you know, if all of the weeds had gotten out of our garden by now, there wouldn't be any of that. And so there's still some work to do to get rid of those weeds. Now I want to give you an object lesson with some of the weeds I pulled up. This is one that if you get it in your garden, you can just pass it around if you want. It's called Johnson grass. That represents some of the things that are in your heart. Even today, you've got them in there. Probably things like pride, envy, jealousy, things like that. And what I discovered with Johnson grass is that if you don't dig up all those big tubes underneath, I couldn't get some of the big long ones, but here's a couple of small ones. And underneath there's just this huge network of these tremendous roots. And that's how they can feed such a tall weed. Well, here's another one.
Is that one edible? I'm just kidding.
Now, unfortunately,
Wow.
I have too big a garden for my age, I think. And my raspberry patch got taken over by these. I don't know the name of these, but they're like a ground cover. And they will cover everything. And they have totally covered my raspberry patch. Now, if I'd been able to tackle those when they were little, that wouldn't be the case. But some of our sins are like that.
Oh.
Now, I got a small one. This is just a small one. It's called pokeweed. One time I had to dig out the root of a pokeweed that was this big. And the reason it got so big was I just kept cutting the top off, and so the root just kept on expanding. But I learned my lesson when I dug that one up. It was like digging up a tree stump. Now, you know, sometimes that's what we do. We have a sin, and we're able to cut it off so it's not so visible by, you know, trying hard or whatever, so it's not very visible. And we think that's okay, but it will grow from the root. It'll grow right back again. So that's not a good method. We've got to get even the root.
It's good to eat though.
That's pork, right? That's greens in the south.
Now this is what we call name slip me right now.
Sit down.
This particular grass, I'll probably think of it in a minute. This particular grass sends out long shoots, and every joint can send up another sprig of grass. And so, in order to get rid of this grass, no, that's not.
Bermuda grass?
Yeah, I think it is called Bermuda grass. Anyway, if you don't get that out, again, the roots go down deep, and it's really hard to get them all. And it has this, every place there's a joint, and it makes lots of joints. And so before long, a whole section of your garden is going to take a lot of work to get that out of it. And so this is all lessons. Now actually, nutgrass is my worst enemy. I can get rid of all the rest of these better than this. And if you look closely, well, let me point it out before we pass it around. If you look closely, you'll see there's a nut. But out from the nut is a very small thing, little root that goes out. And if you try to pull it up from the top, it just breaks off. That's all it does. But the nut still keeps producing more. And they send out usually 5 or 6 of these, and it's really hard to get rid of. So these are some of the lessons. When you're working your garden and you have to work so hard to get those out, you're going to wish that your parents had gotten them out when you were young. But it's too late. They didn't get it out. So now you're going to have to do a lot of work to get those characteristics out of your character. But the good news is God is working, doing everything you can do, and if you will cooperate with Him, He will be able to get all those weeds out.
Amen.
Now, again for children, so that they really learn this lesson, in the Pacific Union Recorder of August 18, 1910, says, "It is well to let each have a piece of ground as his own." See? That way they learn the full lessons. They have a little piece of their own. As you teach them how to prepare a garden, how to prepare the soil for the seed, and the importance of keeping the garden free from weeds, teach them how important it is to keep unsightly, injurious practices out of the life. So if the children have their piece, and they're the ones that plant some seeds, and they wait till they're 6 inches tall, they're going to learn a lesson. They're going to realize, I should have gotten them out sooner. And for all the weaknesses that we still have, there's no better time than now. Because we can guarantee you, if you don't get rid of that weed, it's going to be worse tomorrow, and next week, and next month. And so, you have to work on it now. Teach them to keep down wrong habits as they keep down the weeds in their gardens. So in a way, we're all children, and we still have that lesson to learn, that as we work in our gardens, that there is a very important work that God is wanting to do in our hearts. Well, let's see, I better keep track of the time here. I won't read this one, but the the parable of the sower is supposed to carry a very important spiritual lesson. The seeds that go into the soil need to be the right seeds. Now it's interesting that the good seed will die much easier than the weeds. And that's why we have to be diligent to get the weeds out. But when we are teachers teaching others, we need to be teaching them this important principle of the garden of their heart. And here's the promise at the end of this paragraph. It says, as the plant grows, the correspondence between the natural and the spiritual sowing shall be continued. I've learned that the best success with growing things is when there's close to no weeds at all. It's, they grow so fast it's hard to get to total zero. You can momentarily, but as close to zero as possible. Then they get all the nourishment instead of the weeds getting the nourishment. And that's the last thing you want, to be getting the nourishment that's in the garden. And so every sin that we haven't conquered yet, every character flaw that we didn't see yet, because there's some we haven't even seen, it's all sapping energy from our spiritual growth. And sometimes we feel sad. Why aren't we growing spiritually more? Well, it's because the weeds are still there. And when we allow more weeds to go out, it becomes easier to grow spiritually. So as the plant grows, the correspondence between the natural and the spiritual sowing can be continued. So all through our life, we'll notice that. Now there's a recommendation for really for children, but it could be for all of us in case we need it. In the manuscript 34, 1899, fence a corner from your garden and watch. For an example, the progress of vegetation. What are we supposed to learn by fencing off this piece of our garden? You sow no weeds and cultivate no flowers, but what will be the result in the fall? It will be full of weeds and thistles. So if we say we don't need to have our garden weeded, you know what the result's going to be. You're going to grow up to all kinds of bad characteristics. So whether we like it or not, the battle has to be fought against those weeds.
We fight as long as we live.
That's right, we do. So I looked up to see what the internet said about weed seeds. And here's one statement I found. While most annual weedy grass seeds die within a few years, so you get all your weeds out of the garden and you're faithful keeping them all out, they'll grow back next year and next year and next year, because those weed seeds will last for a number of years. Some broadleaf weed seeds can survive for decades. And some can even last for over a century. So that's why we have such a battle with the weeds. And the same is true of every characteristic and every fault that we have. But don't get discouraged. He can get it out. It may take a long time, But he can get it out because he is the master gardener. And he knows how to get out every weed that's in there. But you do have to cooperate with him and stop complaining when he's trying to get rid of something in your life. Here's another interesting lesson from the manuscript 40, 1896. Should we not individually cultivate the garden of the soul, that we may remove every weed, every tear that Satan has sown while we have neglected our garden? So if there was a period in our life where we neglected our garden, and most of us aren't fully faithful any more than we are in our literal garden, we're not as faithful as we should be. But whenever we're not faithful, Satan is busy sowing seeds, more weeds to grow up. Satan has sown while we have neglected our garden, because we have been so fully occupied in finding the weeds in our neighbor's garden. Uh-oh. So sometimes seeds are developing in our garden because we're looking at brother and sister and we're seeing the weeds in their garden, wishing they would get rid of those, and instead they're growing in our garden. And guess what? They see the weeds growing in our garden, and so they're doing the same thing. But we need to focus on our own garden. Here's another application of this. 6 Testimonies 162. Teachers have led students to forsake the study of the scriptures for a line of study that is not essential. Just let me say this principle. If what we read and what we study does not agree with the Bible, then it is a weed. It's a weed. And so it's talking about teachers that are putting weed seeds in their students' garden. If students thus educated are ever fitted to work for souls, they will have to unlearn much that they have learned. Now that's where the weeding comes in, to get rid of those false ideas that went into our brain and we thought it was true. There's going to be some more work to do to unlearn. They will find the unlearning a difficult work, for objectionable ideas have taken root in their minds like weeds in a garden. And as a result, some will never be able. I was really sad when I read this one. Some will never be able to distinguish between right and wrong.
What's the reference on that?
That's 6 Testimonies 162. Now I see, there's one pretty popular minister that's said he's out of the Adventist church because we're all mixed up. And he's found some people that he thinks is better. But it's not too hard to see that he's been letting some weeds grow pretty big in his garden.
That's right.
And it has ruined him entirely. And he can't even tell the difference between right and wrong anymore. That is the full outcome of Satan's planting if, number one, we don't recognize it's a weed in the beginning, and number two,